Welcome, welcome. Thanks for coming. This is going to be another talk about StereoKit, where instead of going over the details, since we've done that in another talk, we're going to dive into, well, how do you make one, and how do you make an app? How do you actually put it together? Maybe a little bit of the code. And I'm going to try demoing something a little bit new. This is, I've always had this dream of being able to develop inside of VR, while you're inside of the application. I actually, when I very first got a Vive, back when VR stuff first started happening, the very first thing I did, I loaded up Virtual Desktop, stuck it on my head, big pair of headphones, and I loaded up Visual Studio. And I actually, screens weren't great back then, but it's kind of better than the open office. So I really enjoyed it, and I spent a lot of time that way. There was still kind of some issues switching between applications, but as you'll see in a little bit, I can actually sit inside the application and modify it while we're going. First of all, a little bit about me, since this is a brand new presentation. I guess I do a lot of different things, but one of the things that I like to do is tool development. I've spent large parts of my career building tools and helping other developers with their projects. This one in particular is a three-dimensional level design tool where you kind of create the paths around, and it makes a little bit of an environment. So that's the category of thing that I like to do. I also do a lot of procedural art and generative content stuff. So that is actually continuous cellular automata. If you've ever seen Conway's Game of Life or something like that, that's discrete cellular automaton. This is continuous, where you run it on a GPU, it looks at a whole area of stuff, and these are gliders for that. And I was doing that back before it was cool. Would love to do more, but these days I'm working on StereoKit, so I'm going to show you some of that stuff. So first thing I'm going to do is I'll show you a little bit about where to get a template, what to do with it, because there's a couple of different options here. So because this is .NET, there's a lot of different ways that you can do .NET. You might ask .NET what, or .NET which. It's a complicated question, unfortunately. So I've tried to simplify this relatively well. The hot path, the golden path that I recommend is that people go to So this is gonna be a little bit more interactive than my other presentations. I'm not gonna be in a PowerPoint slide the whole time. So if you go to the Getting Started guide on the StereoKit.net, there is StereoKit's Visual Studio template. So this is over here on the Visual Studio Marketplace. And basically, you just go download this and install it. Once you've installed this, then Visual Studio, when you start it up, will actually have a little new project button. So I'm going to do that right now. So loading up Visual Studio. I installed this. I definitely have this installed already. Who would have thought? So you create a new project when you open Visual Studio. And right here, I have this one because I reused it recently. But if you just kind of StereoKit, it has two of them. So right now you have a choice, two choices, .NET Core or UWP. So right now, if you are building for the HoloLens, you need to use UWP. This is the only way to get onto a HoloLens. The UWP projects will also work on desktop as well. I typically don't recommend people go this way unless they are doing HoloLens development, because UWP has a lot longer of a build time. If you are using .NET Core is the latest and greatest .NET stuff, and there's no compile time, so you can iterate really fast. If you are doing a larger project, typically what I recommend is that you kind of merge these two things together into a single project, where it has a .NET Core version for iteration and a UWP version for HoloLens deploy. And I have a couple of examples of that on the GitHub. But for now, I'll show you the .NET Core path, just because demos need to be fast. So, next, I'm going to call it StereoKit Project 1. Because I'm creative. All right, and so this will give me a really basic project, and there's not a whole lot in here. This is pretty simple. So what we get is a program.cs. We get an assets folder with a shader, and there's a little bit in the CS project as well. This is just some basics. Like what I really wanted to do was not provide like the smallest thing. I wanted to provide something that kind of gave you like a starting point to bounce ideas around. So I'm going to put this in flat screen so it doesn't pop up on my HoloLens. So this will load up and probably on my other monitor here. Yeah. So over here. So that's what this gives you. So this gives you kind of like, this is the simulator view that you get. It comes with a nice little floor that keeps you grounded. You get a little cube here. You can grab this cube and wave it around. The simulator lets you move around in this as well, kind of to simulate a kind of like head thing. And like I can put in my second hand here, do stuff like that. So this gives you a nice little environment to work with and something to grab and just mess with. So I thought that was kind of worth sticking in a little bit of the extra code here. But beyond that, it's basically the simple bits. So some settings and initialization. Here is the cube that you grab. This is just the mesh and model, the model for it. So we're generating a model from a mesh and a material, putting this in this cube model thing here. And this one is the floor here. So that floor is actually just, what is the floor is also a cube where it just has this funky shader on it that draws those grid lines. I wanted to illustrate like the fact that StereoKit does support custom shaders and you can like create your own, and like this is kind of how it looks. And so this is creating a material from that shader and then placing that in the scene. So then this is the core loop. So in a previous presentation, you may have seen like an sk.run. This is a slightly older model of doing it. I didn't want to break the templates. So this is a manual sk.run. So what you do is you step in a while loop, and when step returns false, you break out of the while loop and shut down. So this can give you a little bit of extra control in scenarios where you may want to do something fun and interesting with the while loop. But it's basically the same thing as saying sk.run and then giving it this lambda here. But in there, you can see like this is drawing the floor if it's an opaque background. So if you are in VR and the background is opaque, then I give you that floor. But if you're in AR, like on a HoloLens, and the display is transparent, there's no point in drawing a floor for people. So that's just a nice way to give people something to stand on when they're in VR. No floating space here. And then this is just drawing that cube and allowing you to grab that cube and wave it around and stuff like that. So a nice simple little template, and the UWP template looks exactly like this, just with a different deploy target. So that's cool. So that's the main way that I recommend people go. The next way is through Visual Studio Code. This is how all the young kids are doing it these days. I've been doing Visual Studio since I was 12, so I really like Visual Studio. But Visual Studio Code is nice too. So this is kind of like the more manual version of doing it via like .NET command line stuff. So you can say like a .NET new console program or something like that, and then .NET add package StereoKit, and that's more or less all that you need to do. You just can go start doing StereoKit right away. So that's just kind of proof that there's not really all that much in the template, and you can create this from scratch if you want to. It's not that tough. But this is also good, like for example, if you're on a Mac or if you're on Linux or something like that when you don't have access to a real Visual Studio, this is a great way to do it. StereoKit on a Mac is not terribly practical. You can deploy to Android if you want to, but the simulator doesn't run on Mac. But you can code there with Visual Studio Code if you want to. So this is the second thing that I just wanted to show as far as like how you can create a project. Now, after that, I have a couple of other templates that are a little bit different for different purposes. So the first one here, this is the universal template. This is a little bit more complicated. And it basically has 4 different projects in it, a shared DLL, and then target projects for .NET Core, Xamarin, and UWP. So when I was talking about like merging those projects together, this is probably what you would just do instead. Just grab this template here. This is just a GitHub repository because I change it a little bit more often and it doesn't package well into Visual Studio's templating system. But if you just clone it and use it, it's pretty nice. And I'll show that in a moment here. This one right here, the second one, the Cmake Template, if you are doing C++ development with StereoKit, which you can, I wouldn't recommend it for unless you're like a very comfortable programmer. There's no, so StereoKit's documentation is basically all for the C# stuff. So you can use C++, but you kind of have to read through the C# documentation to see the underlying C++ stuff. It's almost one-to-one, but the C# stuff is very idiomatic, and so going down to C, there's a few things where it's like, it's not exactly the same. But that's based on Cmake. This is not a Visual Studio template. It's designed to work well with like Linux and environments like that too. So you can just clone that and like Cmake build stuff like that. If you're a Cmake person, this will be nice. If you're a Visual Studio person, it might be a little bit weird, but you can get it, no problem. And then this one is what we're going to be working with today. This is based on a .NET Core project, but it includes a couple of extra tools in it that are kind of cool that I want to show off. So first off, I'm going to show the universal template here. So where is that? So if I go back to the website, view source on GitHub, this will take me to the GitHub page for StereoKit. And then you can see there's a whole StereoKit organization here. And under the StereoKit organization, we've got like blah, 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 a whole bunch of things. StereoKit template universal is the one that I want here. So I'm going to copy the Git URL for this. And then I'm going to, I have a little folder here, and I'm just going to git clone and, OK. And actually, I don't know if you know that you can do that, but you can do some of the command line operations directly inside the address bar. So that was actually basically the same thing as opening up a command line prompt and doing git clone there. So kind of sweet, nice little shortcut, really great for starting new projects. And it opened up in preview. I think preview is fine in this case. I'm not going to show you too much about this one. I just kind of want to give you the layout. Like, I'm showing you your options right now, so you can make a choice later on. Still on my other window. It's getting there. All right. All right. Nope, that's not it. Windows are complicated. OK, here we go. So I'm all zoomed in. OK, so this is what I was talking about when I said there are 4 different projects. So you can see here I've got platforms, and one for each of those major platforms that I mentioned, Android, .NET, and UWP, and then StereoKit app. So this is the shared DLL. So basically what you do is you design all of your project in this one. This should look very familiar. It's basically the same thing as we saw in the .NET Core template, where we've got like some settings, we've got some of that initialization data, we generate our assets, and then on step, we draw them. But you can also see that this is inside of a class instead of being out in its own thing. And basically, the way this works is each platform has its own initialization setup, and it manages that initialization and kind of runs the application. The big problem is that an Android project looks really different compared to the other ones. It's got a lot of extra boilerplate stuff. It's not the same as a Windows application. And so I tried to wrap it up into something that looks fairly simple. And actually, like if you used XNA way back in the day, this might look maybe a little bit familiar. Kind of that same sort of just wrapping up the complicated bits into a single class. But if you're using this, basically all you really need to do is, like, you'll say, set this one as active. So if you want to switch between a different project, you just say, like, set this as active. Or set as startup project. Close enough. And that'll deploy to one target or the other. So there is a .NET MAUI thing that came out recently that I've been very excited about. I've been on the edge of my seat for ages, and it is technically out, but still requires Visual Studio 17.3. And 17.3 is in preview. So I have a template that I've been working on. It's very close to being ready, and I should be shipping that in maybe the next month or so. I'm not going to make any guarantees, but it's a soon thing. And that would basically cover Android, .NET, and it'll cover WebAssembly later as well. It doesn't do UWP. MAUI doesn't do UWP, which is a little bit sad. It might be able to do some MS Build magic. I don't love programming in MS Build, but you got to do it sometimes if you're building that stuff. So it's possible that, like, I'll just revise this universal project to do like a a Maui thing and a UWP thing. Basically, I'm going to try and keep the universal thing to be like a project that you can always use to deploy everywhere. You'll be able to also create just a Maui thing or a multi-target thing, whatever it is, and just use that for common stuff. So that one's coming. This one's pretty nice in the meantime. So if you're playing around doing stuff really quickly, just go for a .NET project, .NET Core project. If you're building something that needs to be everywhere, I'd recommend the Universal project. That's my general recommendations here. Now we're going to do some code. I'm basically going to introduce you to a couple of the kind of like core elements that I think are important to know about. I think I was originally for this talk going to go like, I'm going to build like a whole application, but I think this is going to be a little bit more compact than just that. There is, however, the StereoKit Inc. project. I mentioned this a little bit before in one of my other talks, but this is a really good encapsulation of a project from start to finish with like kind of all the trappings that an application usually has in it. And we'll kind of be showing some stuff that's a little bit similar to this in the code. But that's a really good one to look at outside of this. So I'm going to try diving into this demo, and this is a little bit of a complicated trick. Actually, let me show you a little bit about this first. But this demo is a little bit weird, and if it doesn't work, then please don't mind too much. It did kind of work right before this. So this should look a little bit familiar. This is kind of like the .NET 6 stuff where it's stripped down, doesn't have a class or anything like that. But we still have the same stuff. SK settings, an initialization call, and then our main run loop here. The big difference here is that we have two of these tools. So I have a little folder of these iSteppers that are kind of like designed to be like little helper functions. And so in this particular case, I have the desktop duplicator and the pass-through extension, the Facebook pass-through extension. I also have like a little avatar thing and a little camera thing. So you can find those in the GitHub repository. But basically, a stepper is an interface that has an initialize, a step, and a shutdown. And so when you register it up there, it just makes sure that it gets initialized, stepped every frame, and then shut down properly. So they are in the project over here, like desktop duplicator is here, and it's a little bit long, it's a little bit gross, it's not too bad, but this is basically digging into DXGI and duplicating your desktop screen, so it's a little complicated. So we're not going to go over that in detail, but you can basically, like, the idea is that this is all that you really need to do for a StereoKit application. Just slot it in. It's cool. If you extend it, though, I'd love to see your changes. Please send them back to me. OK, so I'll go with this. I'm going to put on a headset. And all right, you can see the mirror. And that. Build succeeded. Debug, and there we go. OK, cool. Great. OK, so now you can see my hands right here, and I have this desktop duplication window right here. Now, the interesting thing here, too, like you saw there was the desktop duplicator and the pass-through. So I actually have this black areas outside here that you're seeing. For me, this is actually pass-through. So it's like if you raise your hand, I can point at you. Right there? Yeah, there. So there. So like you can see, there's also pass-through going on right here. And this is actually really nice because I found that having the pass-through makes being in VR and developing a lot more comfortable. Like you just kind of have, it just feels a lot nicer. So I'm going to try and do a little bit of coding. Can you guys see this code all right? Yeah? OK, cool. So first thing we're going to do here, and the one trick, I'm going to be a slow typer today because I don't usually use this keyboard. Mesh.sphere.draw. So, nope. Nope. I'm not exactly a touch typer. And then material. Default and so the the default sphere that I have here is actually 1 meter large, so I'm going to scale this to be 0, 0, nope, dot 1f. Okay, so I think the origin's somewhere around here, so when I save. Oh, no, it's over here. So like you can see here, I didn't leave the application, it's just right here. This is, this is kind of cool. So just looking at this, this is one way that I like to draw things in StereoKit. This is kind of like the lower level primitive way. So there are assets in StereoKit, and each asset usually has some sort of purpose, like it lives on the GPU or something like that. So mesh.sphere, this is a default asset that is a mesh. It's, you can kind of see this right here. It's actually based off of kind of like a square that's been spherified. And then I just have the default material, which is just kind of like, a matte white, and then it looks good in most cases. And then this is a matrix that represents some sort of transform, like scaling, translation, or rotation. In this case, I have a lot of shorthands inside of matrix that really make building these a little bit easier. So like you can see there's R, TRS, S, T, TR, like translation, rotation, and scaling, that's all it is. But because you do these a lot, I kind of condense them down so that they'd be a little simpler to look at and actually fit on a screen when you zoom it in like this. Isn't that wonderful? Okay, so the next thing I want to do is show you this is not a great place for my sphere, but where do I put it? I don't know exactly where this is in space. So what am I going to do here? I want to do, I'm going to get the hand, input dot hand. Please don't mind my excruciating typing. Oh, no, I got it. There we go. Handed dot. No, curses. Okay. Left hand. That sounds good. And I want was joint ID. Is that the right one? No, I should just type finger ID. Index finger and joint ID tip. Okay, so this is grabbing the. So this takes my right hand, just grabs the information about that hand, and gives me an array where I say I want the index finger and I want the tip of it. So this then gives me a whole bunch of information where, I want the position. And, well, actually I wanted the pose for this because I'm going to attach it to the finger. Sorry, I really should have practiced with this keyboard a little bit more. Here we go. And over here. I was debating. I have a really nice keyboard and I carried it around, but it's kind of big. And I just forgot it today. Equals. There we go. All right, so there's that. And now I just want to, so I have this pose. So in StereoKit, a pose is basically a position and a rotation. So that's all that is. It doesn't usually include scale. I don't really love the idea of scaling, but I think I need to add a few more constructs for scaling into StereoKit. So text. So I also have a whole class for adding text and stuff to things. So the UI has a whole lot of text stuff built into it, but also you can just have free-floating text. So I want toString. No, I don't want the whole pose. I just want position. Dot toString. And then I want this at p dot toMatrix. There's a toMatrix here, folks. There we go. Goodness, okay. And now, okay, so now I have on my finger the position of my finger. So I can look here and say, okay, where do I want this particular sphere? And I can say -3, -5. So let's do that. T. Oh, what was it? -3? -0. Dot. And it was it 4 or 5? 5, okay, all right. You'd think after 20 years of typing, I would be a little better at it. So there we go. So that's kind of cool. Like, you know, being able to put text like this, like just in a spot, like this is nothing to code. Like this is 2 lines of code, and so like I didn't even really care about this as a feature, but it was just like something that I could put my finger there and figure out where the position was, and it's worth the time for me to type that out if I actually could type, and that gives me some information that I can use to build other things a little more interesting. Like the great thing about having easy code to write is that it then becomes trivial to write it, and you can just do it. It's not a chore or anything like that. So this is cool. I like this. What was the next thing I wanted to show you? Oh, okay. All right. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a user interface. Okay. And I probably I'll just stick this up on my head for a moment or two. Make it comfy. All right. Okay. So if I want a window, I'm actually going to get rid of these things. What you'll find is that I'm actually not much better of a typer when I have my eyes on me. Oh. So pose. Right. Okay. So pose. 0, 0, -0.5. So in StereoKit, usually -z is forward. So this is usually a good idea. Like a -5 or -4 is usually kind of out in front of you. Quanta identity. So this is just kind of like a default starting point that I want to put a window at. And down here, UI window begin. And what do we say? We'll put a bunch of different things in here. And so this is kind of an interesting thing. So one of StereoKit's kind of core ideas here is that StereoKit doesn't store your state for you. It tries to be as immediate mode as possible, and it tries not to keep things that it doesn't have to. So in this particular case, when we say draw a window at this pose, StereoKit is not actually creating a window behind the scenes. It technically does, but what you're doing is you're giving it the data that's important to that window. I just gave it, this is exactly the variable that this window is working with. You can change this to whatever you want, whenever you want to, and StereoKit will just roll with it. And that's really nice. Also, similarly, you can just take a look at that pose and see what you want to do with it. So if I do this, okay, rebuild and apply. So that was an edit that .NET Watch kind of needs to go through a little bit more for. So it technically did just restart the application there, I think. And this is one of those occasions where the Quest link connection kind of fails. So we may be switching back to just demoing over in flat screen from here on. So that was kind of a nice idea. I think Quest has a little bit more to smooth out before this is a perfect experience. But I think if you're sticking into it, you're not going in and out too much, it's a lot more stable. But this is kind of the idea of how I wanted to develop all these years, and this kind of puts us right there, where it's close enough to actually start doing some of that. So hot reload. Desktop duplication, very cool stuff. One of the other things, I really believe that desktop duplication is really important to the VR experience as far as being productive as a developer. And so one of the reasons why I built some of these tools is because I would really like other people to build nice tools around them as well. So if you do take desktop duplication and put it into your thing, let me know. I'd love to see it. I'd retweet the heck out of that. Okay, so I'll do this, and I'll switch it back over to flat screen. That way it doesn't pop up on my Quest while I'm not looking. Okay, so and then I'm just gonna load this back up again so that you guys can see it. Because we can still do the reload thing to some degree. So like this is the window here that we just created. Like it's nothing terribly complicated. It's just an empty window with a little title on it. Okay, so if we did this UI.button, just and then hi. So we can then see right there. So adding a button is pretty simple. So StereoKit has kind of an automatic layout built in for the user interface. So like if I copy this and I do this again, and then Alt-Tab, whatever. Okay, so like it basically just kind of like advances to the next line every time that you put a new UI element. If you want them on the same line, you can do like a UI.same line, and it'll actually group them together like this, which is kind of nice. I've got a whole bunch of other things. I don't know, like a UI.separator. This is, just to add some flavor to it, and just puts like that can be a nice way of grouping things together. I've also got like panels and things. There's a few tools for grouping. The other one that can be really interesting is the H slider. So like if I have float val equals 0.5, not a semicolon, and then UI.H slider. Ref val. Okay, and that, oh no, I just didn't put in quite enough. This is minimum, maximum step. That's fine. There we go. Okay, so this is then horizontal slider that you can like squeegee around, do all sorts of stuff. Like this is really great for like RGB sliders or I don't know, like all sorts of inputs and stuff like that. So this is kind of like how the user interface works, and I've got I try to have documentation for most of these different things. Like if you check out StereoKit.net, and if you go down to the UI class here, which should be towards the bottom, so you can see like here are fields and properties. This is usually kind of telling you a little bit about the state of the user interface, and then we have like a variety of different buttons, the handles for grabbing things, sliders, separators, images, text inputs, volumes. You can build some of your own UI elements using some of the pieces in here. Layout areas. So there's two different ways for doing layout. There's the automatic layout, which is a little bit limited. This is something that's going to improve in the future, but you can also build your own layout system. So anytime there's like a button function, there is also a button at function where you can specify it goes here or there. And so you have a little bit more control over that if you want to like, you can also mix and match some of these where you can say like, I'm going to reserve some layout here and lay out your own stuff within that reserved area, which is kind of handy. Yeah, and so there's a bunch of documentation on this, but there's a lot of stuff in here. The UI is fairly extensive. So we're gonna stop with that part. And I think, one thing I did want to show. So the cool thing is, because this is Unicode, one of the fonts that I support on Windows, like right away I hook into this because it's super, super useful. So there is the Segway MDL2 font icons. And so what you can do is just like, copy this. Like this is an interesting looking one. And then go back to Visual Studio here, wherever that is. And I'm just gonna stick that in right here. Like Visual Studio doesn't know what that is, but StereoKit does, which is kind of cool. So this is kind of a nice way to just like really quickly get an icon into your application. They do a little bit of a funny alignment thing there. Like you can see it's a little taller than, I don't know if that's like intentional or not, but that's kind of cool. Like it's a great way to just go with images. If you want, however, I do have support for images. So like in this particular case, I have a Sprite. What was it? I think I have a folder icon equals sprite.fromFile. PNG. So this is this is actually in my project. I put this here already. Folder.png. So that's in the assets folder. And there's a sprite. So if I do a button image, then I can do hi and given a folder. And so this is build and apply. So that was another one of those edits that requires a full start. And so now you have a button with an image on it. So sprites are basically this idea of taking any sort of texture and turning them into something that you can just put in the screen. So you can do like a sprite.draw, you can pass that into these. There's a couple of other places where sprites are used in the user interface, but it's a good way of doing that. The idea behind a sprite is also this batching concept. So like if you think about performance, having a lot of different images around the place can be bad for performance because they end up getting put into different draw calls. One concept behind sprite is that they get put into a sprite sheet and then batched together. So this is another advantage of doing that. And that's actually a little bit sneaky because I don't do this yet. It's something that's built in and is going to be implemented. I have it halfway implemented and it'll be in like one of the next versions or two. But that's something that you can basically like use and treat it like that up until next version. So that's kind of cool. So that's the user interface. And okay, cool. So next, I want to, okay, so sprites, model, okay, models. I want to show you loading a model from file. Because this is something that you do a lot, and it's something that's kind of StereoKit's nice and good at. So we'll delete, actually, no, I kind of wanted to put it in the user interface. So that's fine. Load. And then I'll put, I have a window pose. Let me do a pose for the model. Actually, we'll just do pose.identity is basically 0, 0, 0 with a regular orientation. So it's kind of a shortcut for that. And then we'll do nil for now. And what I want to do is, if they press this button, I want to load that model. So this is platform.filepicker. So this is all that you need to do to have a file. Like this is something that I always dreamed about. Like if you try to do a file picker in anything, it's just like, oh, like I gotta write this file picker and that file picker. So StereoKit's file picker is a universal file picker. It works on any platform. Like if you do this in UWP, it gives you the mixed reality file picker that the operating system has. If you do this on flat screen, it pops up the traditional flat screen file picker. If you're doing this in VR on desktop, then it'll do a fallback file picker. You know, basically, it just kind of provides the nicest option that it has available for you for each of those different contexts. And it just like, it's simple, but it definitely works, which is nice. So open mode, and then I'm going to say, there's 2 overloads for this one. I'm going to use the second one here. So this one just gives me a file. And on file load, I just want to say model.fromFile, capital M. From file. So that's that. And then I don't want to do anything on cancel and a null. And then assets. So this assets.modelFormats, this is a list of all file formats that StereoKit supports. And it is just kind of like embedded into there. So if you want to do like a file picker for models, it's just, what's that? Okay, so this now is, I need to assign that. Model equals. That's good. There we go. All right. So now our model is loaded, and we just need to say like model draw dot draw. And we have a model pose. Objects. And then I don't care about this. Cool. All right. So run that one. Ding, 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 ding. And we do this, because we're in flat screen, we get this thing. And so I have, I think I have a nice little guitar thing. And so I'm going to load that up. And so now that's just a GLTF that I load from file. So that's pretty straightforward as far as like getting a model on screen. This can be animated, this can be like physically based rendering. Like I get a lot of stuff off of Sketchfab, and I test those out pretty regularly. So there's a pretty wide variety of GLTF stuff that works right out of the box with StereoKit, which is really nice. So that's cool. This is not interactive though, so that's always kind of nice. If we have our guitar, we want to like pick it up and wave it around or whatever. And oh, I just closed that. That's fine. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to like model does not equal no. Put that back in there. Oh no, I deleted it. And oh yeah, okay. So UI.handle. So the UI.handle is the probably like it's kind of nice. So basically, it's kind of one of the core level elements for the user interface that some of the other things are based off of. Like the window uses this as well. A window is just a handle that also draws user interface on it. And basically the handle just says like, if your hands are in this bounds and you're grabbing it, then you can move it around and wave it around and do things with it. So in this case, this is the model ID, ref is model pose, and then the handle is going to be model.bounds. Okay, so this is kind of like the one part that's a little bit fun, and this is just saying like it has to be within these bounds in order for you to grab it. So we're just taking the bounds of the model itself and putting this in here. So one interesting thing here too is if you want to scale the model, then that's a little bit more interesting. So we'll just do like a half scale for this. So I'm going to just scale the bounds and scale the transform as well. So this right here, so a pose does not contain scale in it. A pose is just position and rotation. So in this case, when we are converting the pose to a matrix, we're also passing in a scale value for it to use to say like this is, use your transform, your position and your rotation, and then also here's your scale. So that's that, and this should work. Entire scan. And now if I grab this, I can wave it around. Cool, very cool, right? There we go. So that's loading a model and making it interactive, which is pretty fantastic. Not too much code, right? I hope. Doesn't look too bad. All right. Okay, and then, I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to like copy and paste some code that I've written before. So I just wanted to show you drawing some lines and then maybe some, well, okay, so I have this code here, so I'm just going to slot in some cube map stuff. So this is, so I have that interesting background. It's actually not interesting. It's kind of white and blurry, I guess. So this is, if I want to have like something a little shinier, a little more interesting, what I'm doing here, this is another asset. It's a texture. Like, so it's kind of similar to a sprite, except it gets used in a different context. Usually you slot it into a material or toss it into some object or something like that. But in this case, what we're doing is we are loading an equirectangular cube map. So this is like, if you've ever seen like one of those 360 photos that's wrapped flat or like, you know, a weird projection of the Earth or something like that. That's basically those images, an equirectangular image. And so this then converts that into a cube map. And then we tell the renderer, this is the sky texture, and this is the sky lighting. So when we say like, grab the texture's cube map lighting, we're looking at the lighting that the cube map represents, and it creates like a spherical harmonics for it, and you can pass it into this. So this loads it up, assigns it, and let's see what that looks like. So there we go. So that's kind of cool. And you know, this just gives you the background here. This is not visible if you are in AR. Backgrounds are always cut out in AR unless you like go through and hack them in anyways. But it also, you know, you get the same sort of lighting as this. So this is kind of like a nice scene. The strong lighting up here gives you some shadows down here, and this is just kind of cool. If we have, I don't think this GLTF is particularly shiny or anything, but the lighting is kind of being applied to it. Like this is photogrammetry, so the lighting is kind of baked in. But instead, I think, oh, hang on. I think I have, project assets. So this one's always really shiny, and so that works pretty well. So Like you can see there, like this works really nicely for creating something a little more sparkly, get some of that physically based rendering looking really nice and stuff like that. So if you're ever like in a dull kind of environment and you're like, my models don't look that great, then you may want to try playing with the cube maps and stuff like that. And that's just that little piece of code there, which is pretty nice. So this is that. Okay, and 5 more minutes. All right, so last one. So we're gonna do hand input. So this part is, so I have a class called lines, and the big idea is that I always want to draw lines. You know, like drawing lines is really helpful for developing, for debugging. Sometimes it's even practical for like, you know, making your application. But it's really important to have lines. And I'm always bothered that it takes so long to add lines to things in other applications. So in StereoKit, lines are just there right away. So this is a list of line points. A line point is like a position, scale, color sort of thing, so that you can like indicate like, oh, this is like a wobbly line or whatever. Here we're grabbing the hand again. You saw that where I was grabbing an individual joint on the hand. Here I'm just grabbing the whole hand. The hand itself has a lot of information on it. So like in this case, we're just saying like, this example is just going to be like when we pinch, it starts drawing a line. And then we let go, it stays. And then when we pinch again, it'll create a new line. So that's what this is. So when we pinch, it clears. If it is currently pinched, then it adds a point to that line. And you can see we're grabbing the fingertip position and using that as the line point. And so then after that, just every frame, we draw these lines. Now this is converting this list into an array right here, which, you know, if you're familiar with C# development, that's kind of horrific. But for demo purposes, it'll do. Don't do that for yours. But check this out. So in here, I can now do dink. Sweet, right? Not bad for, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines. Yeah, not too bad. I'm not disappointed with that. So that's kind of cool. Instant lines. And so I think this is kind of like the majority of what I wanted to kind of show you for this particular presentation. It's just a bunch of different things that like I think you'll find useful and kind of give you an idea of how you develop an application inside of StereoKit. So hopefully that doesn't look too terrifying. I think that's really nice. Generally, all of those little things are quite small little samples all on their own and get you productive really fast. Okay, so yeah, okay, I don't really have anything else for other than that, so I'll just wrap this up. I think I might have time for maybe a question or two. So anybody got some? Or? Yeah. Okay, so what's the iteration process on HoloLens look like? So with regards to remoting in particular, so StereoKit doesn't really support remoting. The big thing that StereoKit does do is deploy times to HoloLens take about 20 seconds. So it's very fast compared to a lot of other tools. It's still not like blazingly fast, but it's comfortable. Like it's honestly enough that I don't really mind not having remoting available for it. So this is generally where I say, like, if you're doing HoloLens development and you really want to iterate fast, I recommend kind of like hybrid development, where you develop on another device and deploy for testing and stuff like that. Which, you know, I guess I typically do spend most of my development time just kind of like in the simulator itself. Like it's just, yeah, that's a little bit tangential at this point, but hopefully that answers your question. Yeah. Yes? So does StereoKit take in sensor data like spatial mapping? So for HoloLens, I do what is it, occlusion meshes. So it scans the room, it takes those meshes and brings them into StereoKit, and StereoKit can render them or do raycasts against them. So this is right now HoloLens only. I don't think there's any other platforms that really provide a mesh like that. I think Quest just recently released or preview an extension for doing scene understanding stuff. So I am looking into that, and that's a soon thing. But yeah, that's the current status of environment understanding stuff. Yeah. How quickly does the scene understanding stuff update on HoloLens 2? So it does. It does it relatively fast, like maybe a couple times a second. I'm not really certain. So for StereoKit, I actually do have controls for it. By default, I believe what I do is if you walk a certain distance, it'll refresh the data. So I don't have it running all the time in the background. I kind of like ask for it as your environment changes a little bit. But you do have some tools to say like, oh, I want you to run at an interval, or I want you to update at these distances instead. So there's some controls there too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we're out of time, so we'll wrap that up. And I'll be around. There's another presentation coming after this one, but thanks for sticking with me. I hope you enjoyed. Mm-hmm.